Well, Queensland Premier Anastasia Palaszczuk stepped down last week. It came as, in some sense, as a bit of a shock, but also in the same way that Daniel Andrews' resignation was a shock for some and really not for others. There are plenty of people that saw this coming a very, very long way away. Queensland's not a state that I'm particularly familiar with, so I thought I would bring on a guest who loves his state very, very dearly and, in fact, fights for it every single day, and that is none other than the federal Senator Malcolm Roberts. Thank you so much for making time for us here on the Aussie Wire.
You're most welcome, Topher. I love what you're doing, mate. We've got to get the independent news reports out.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Now, I think it is fair to say that you love Queensland. You're a passionate man when it comes to your state and all of what goes on there and all of what could happen there and the potential that is built into that place. Tell us a little bit about the legacy that Anastasia Palaszczuk leaves behind and the consequences of her time in office.
Well, I think for a start, she's much the same as Dan Andrews. She's loathed at the moment in Queensland, and people are very happy. I got the news at a function on Sunday in the park, and must have been about 20 people there, and I showed people on the phone. Just a cheer went up. People are absolutely delighted she's gone. Her period has been ruled by the Labor machine, which is always the case in Queensland.
Sure.
Her successor will be the same, and luck and not skill. So the Labor machine, not Anastasia Palaszczuk, and luck.
Now,
she was the accidental premier.
The Queensland state government, of course, I'm mindful of the fact, obviously, you're a federal senator for Queensland, but with the Queensland state government, correct me if I'm wrong, is a single house government, meaning that once the government has the majority, there really is no house review and nothing to hold them back. We see the same thing in New Zealand. It's very easy and very fast for the government to go in the wrong direction, but it's potentially, is it not, also very easy and fast for them to go in the right direction? Is there an opportunity here, and do you think that will be seized?
There is an opportunity. It will only happen if a smaller party like One Nation gets balance of power. We're clearly not in a position where we're going to run the government, but we can stop the government, Liberal, National Party or Labor, from doing stupid things by withholding the balance of power. So we can be a brake and we can steer people in the right direction without having absolute power. And that's essential for Queensland. Someone asked me after the previous federal election, 2019, if I thought Queensland was now under threat, because Queensland federally won a lot of the seats in Queensland, almost all. And I said it depends upon the opposition leader at the time, which didn't seem too likely, Deb Frecklington. Look, I'm not inspired by David Crisafulli. I think he would be better than what we've got right now. Stephen Miles is going to be a joke. He's got no credibility. He makes ridiculous statements, puts his foot in it a lot. So it all depends upon the Liberal National Party. And remember, Topher, I called Anastasia Palaszczuk, as many other people did, and the accidental premier. She defeated Campbell Newman, and Campbell Newman was defeated not by the Labor Party machine, but by his own senior politicians who rejected him being parachuted in from externally. I thought Campbell Newman fulfilled his promises. He didn't do anything unexpected, and yet he was crucified because his own. And I've heard this from members of Parliament who were in the Liberal National Party in Campbell Newman's government, and they said it was the Liberal Party's senior members of Parliament that destroyed Campbell Newman.
Yeah, wow.
So it all depends upon the Liberal Nationals, and I've got very much faith on them.
Well, Anastasia Palaszczuk, of course, presided over Queensland during the COVID pandemic, much like Daniel Andrews that you mentioned in the opening here. And this is going to form a very big part of her legacy. Here she is, of course, making a big song and dance along with others, rugby players, etc., about getting the jab. We can't really talk about that era without talking about the legacy that's being left behind from these therapies, these gene therapies, and the rule of law implications of the various mandates that we saw along the way. How do we unscramble this egg?
Well, just remember, Topher, here am I correcting you, which is very, very rare, but they were experimental gene therapy based treatments.
Yes, indeed.
They weren't tested, and the only test that we relied entirely on Pfizer's word for those experimental techniques, and that they relied upon their own tests, which were cut short because of the number of deaths. But what we've seen with Anastasia Palaszczuk is that she refused entry of people from northern New South Wales into the Queensland hospital system. As a result of that, I believe one of the two twins that were refused admission, in the womb, one of those twins died. Other people could not get treatment. The federal government gives Queensland money to look after northern New South Wales' hospital needs.
Sure.
And that was just inhuman. We lost 7,000 nurses, stood down. Many are still out. I've heard some stories. I checked before coming on today. Lost many very, very good people. Many were stood down. They're applying to get jobs back with Queensland Health. And I checked with one very accurate nurse, and she said, as far as she knows, no one has been returned.
Yeah,
and yet the health system is in absolute crisis up here. So we've got 7,000 nurses stood down. We've got thousands of teachers who stood down. And then when they returned to work, they were fined. We've got thousands of police who were stood down. But they never belted the fireys, because the firemen and women, they stood up, and they had a very proactive campaign, a very strong reactive campaign as well, legally. But now they're attacking the leaders of that movement. We've got ambulances. So before COVID, we would be weeks before we'd see an ambulance, between seeing ambulances. Now, every time I go out almost, I see an ambulance, and quite often the lights are flashing. They've crashed the health system with bloated, top-heavy bureaucracy. The Queensland government excluded the mayor of Brisbane from the organising committee top meetings with regard to future building of arenas and so on. And the biggest thing of all that the Labor Party did was entrench the power of union bosses. Let me give you a couple of quotes that I dug up.
Sure.
This is just in today's paper. They're talking about Mr. Dick, Cameron Dick, who was one of the contenders for the leadership succession. Mr. Dick and his 18-member right faction have thrown their support behind Mr. Miles after long negotiations between union bosses on Monday.
Yeah.
And another quote from the Australian: Stephen Miles' biggest union backer, Gary Bullock, has been locked in secret backroom deals in a bid to convince rival union leaders to install his hand-picked candidate as Premier. That's Stephen Miles.
Yeah.
So it's a run for the union bosses, mate.
Yeah, I address that directly in my book, Good People Break Bad Laws, talking about the perverse incentives of how politics operates in the major parties in those backroom deals. That's a story for another time. But you spoke a moment ago about the fiery standing up, and of course they're not the only ones who stood up during the lockdowns, etc. There are many different examples. I happen to have some footage here of a truck protest that took place. Of course, they're not the only ones. There were many others as well. What's been the effect on the Queensland people? One of the things that I've noticed about Victorians and New South Welshmen now that I've moved across the border is there are more people politically engaged and paying attention than ever before as a result of what they experienced during lockdowns, etc. Is the same true for Queensland?
Yes, definitely. And I'm just looking at your footage of Brock Holroyd. I had conversations with him for many, many months afterwards. He did a top job. He was hounded by the police all over the country. His truck was registration plates were taken. He was stopped. To answer your question, normally in the past, if a loathed premier had resigned and notice came out on a Sunday function in a park, there would have been, oh, good. But this was, cheers went up. So yes, people are much more engaged. They despise what's happened to them during COVID, the mismanagement, the deceit. They're waking up to the destruction of our energy system, waking up to the destruction of our food system. One of the legacies of Premier Palaszczuk is that she has destroyed farming communities and regional communities up and down the east coast of Queensland because of her lies on the so-called science that was showing the farming was hurting the barrier reef. Complete nonsense. We exposed that with questions in Senate committee hearing. There's no science to back it up. So people are awake to what's going on. Not as awake as they need to be, but they are waking.
Well, Senator Malcolm Roberts, thank you for bringing me as a non-Queenslander up to speed with the mood there. It sounds like it is remarkably similar to the response in Victoria to when Daniel Andrews stepped down, and I can only hope that we see Queenslanders getting more and more active and more involved, and what better place to get involved than with yourself and Pauline Hanson and the One Nation Party. I think you guys do outstanding work and have done for many, many years. You've got the track record to back you up. So, Senator Malcolm Roberts, thank you so much for joining us here on the Aussie Wire, and please keep up the great work.
Thank you very much. You're welcome. And likewise, keep up the great work. We need your independent voice out there, Topher, telling the truth.
Cheers.